Andrew is a researcher at UC Berkeley's Center for Human Compatible AI, founder and president of the Berkeley Existential Risk Initiative, and advisor to the Survival and Flourishing Fund. Today, Andrew is going to introduce the S process, an algorithm that enables multiple funders to simultaneously delegate the optimization of funding decisions to overlapping groups of trusted advisors. This also allows the advisors to debate and coordinate in deciding the total amount of funding any particular project should receive. Welcome, Andrew.
Hello. Are you hearing me fine, Carola?
Hear you great.
Great. Thank you. Okay. So thanks for having me here. Thanks to everybody who's attending. And I just want to call out a preference I have for how to use the chat, which is that I'd like to field questions during the middle of my talk. I don't want to have to wait till the end if you don't mind. Carola, could you type up if a question comes in the chat? Could you say, Andrew, there's a question, and then pose the question to me right there in the middle?
Sure, I'll interrupt you at will.
Please, thank you very much. And to anyone who's participating also, I would like people here to ask questions of the form, wait, what is that? Like if I say something and you don't know what it is, and it seems like it's important to the talk, just pipe up and ask what it is, because you're a representative sample of the audience, and I don't necessarily know what everybody here knows or doesn't know, and I want us to have a conversation, not just a delivery of content. So, so please do ask questions for clarification as needed. And with that, yeah, thanks, Jamie. With that, I will share screen. I'm going to want to use which screen? This one. All right. Do we have my presentation about to enter presentation mode and now in presentation mode?
You're in presentation mode.
Great, thanks. Okay, so thanks again, everybody. My name's Andrew. My friends call me Critch, and my Critches call me Andrew. I'm a research scientist at Berkeley. This is a thing that kind of came up on the side, but became super intellectually interesting and just generally motivating because of the good that it can do to bring funding to public goods. The work here is I would say joined at this point with Jan Tallinn, who's a Skype co-founder and funder of a lot of the grants most of the grants we make. Also Oliver Habrika from Litecoin Infrastructure, who I hope is here in the chat. And other people from Barry and Litecoin, including Eric Rogstad, Alex Flint, Ray Arnold, and Ben Pace. Thanks a ton to you guys. I don't think we could have gotten this off the ground as fast as we did, or maybe at all without you. So the history here is that this S process thing that I will define, the whole talk is going to be defining that. It's a process I designed initially for the Berkeley Existential Risk Initiative to make grants from donations made by Jan. And we looked at it and we thought this doesn't really need to be part of an institution to work, and it's maybe even better if it's not. So we created this virtual fund that helps coordinate donors and people that are advising the donors to make grants. We've made $16 million in grants so far over 5 rounds over the past couple of years. The donors for the grants have been Jan Tallinn, Jed McCaleb, and David Marble. I think we're gonna almost certainly distribute another 10 million or so in the next couple of months, and then next year probably more. And they've been great. The organizations, I mean, they've of course been sort of selected from a cause area that we, the organizers, cared about, but the process can apply to any cause area. So we're trying to, with this process, we're trying to push the Pareto frontier of collective intelligence, fairness, and trust. There's going to be a few ideas that I want you to come away with from this talk that maybe you already have them and I want to emphasize them more, or if maybe you've never had them before. The first is the following. When we aggregate intelligent decision making, we don't want to aggregate actions. We want to aggregate information. And marginal value functions are a more intelligent type of information to aggregate than money. So I'm going to be convincing you that we shouldn't be all just throwing donations into a collective pool. We should be throwing marginal value functions into a collective pool. and then using those value functions to decide on our donations. The second thing I want to say is that funder final say options are great. If you are helping someone make grants and you let them have the final say over the grant, that is less stressful for them. So there's lots of people in the crypto space right now that all of a sudden have a bunch of money and want their friends to help them decide where to do it. And I just want to encourage people to use funder final say options in their processes. The next thing I'm going to want to emphasize is discourse, the importance of discourse. We're all pretty numerate here, I think, and I think there's a tendency to try and use numbers to summarize away all of the trust issues or coordination problems we have. And I think numbers are a huge help. I'm a mathematician. That's my PhD. I'm now in an EECS department at Berkeley. So I like computers, I like numbers, but discourse is not to be dispensed with. We need conversations. I was really pleased to see in Carl's talk the implementation of like publicly recorded and visible conversations. And the last is that repeated simulations during conversations can be a hugely useful tool in helping people project what's going to be the outcome of this conversation. And the S process is something that uses this kind of simulation discourse combo, along with also this funder final say principle and the marginal value function aggregation. So that's an overview of where I'm going with this talk. Now I want to focus on a specific scenario for you guys to think about. Imagine you're looking at 30 organizations, and each one of those organizations has different growth prospects in your evaluation or in the evaluation of people you trust. They have some capacities where if they get 100K, they're going to run an event. If they get $1 million, they're going to hire some people, and maybe you even know who they're thinking of hiring. With $10 million, they're maybe going to expand to different teams or commit to 5 years of operations. So these different organizations have different kinds of plans depending on how much money they're going to get, and not just plans, but ability to execute those plans. So what is the optimal amount of money to give to these organizations? The answer depends on marginal value functions. So for each organization, you can draw a curve that indicates how good is it to give an extra dollar to this organization. And for most practical purposes, there's diminishing marginal returns to giving to a particular org. I don't mean to claim that there's diminishing marginal returns to giving to a particular cause area or service. For example, I believe there have been increasing marginal returns to the influx of money and talent into the crypto space. However, for any particular organization, there's often a sort of bottleneck of once the staff and network of that organization is overwhelmed, it's not as useful to like pump them full of more money relative to some other organization that doesn't have any money yet. And so for the purpose of this talk and for the S process, we usually assume that there's a diminishing marginal returns to giving right now heaps and heaps of money to any particular organization. And if you draw those curves for yourself, if you say, okay, how valuable is the first dollar we give to this org? Is it worth $1? Or how, maybe this org right here, we think $1 to that org is like only worth 60 cents compared to $1 given to our favorite org. So you can put a little y-intercept here on your graph, and that helps decide the shape of your curve. There's another point you can choose, which is the x-intercept, which is what's the point at which I think it's just not really worth giving more money to this organization right now. It's just kind of pointless. That's the x-intercept. And you can mess with the concavity of the curve. You can make it convex in whatever direction you want to indicate something like wanting to give lots of money up into a threshold. And I'm just going to share with you the app that we use for this. So you can see what the experience is like from a user perspective. So here are those curves I just showed you from the slide. And here is user XO. Maybe this is Xavier Oscarson. And if you see here, as Xavier turns down the shape of this curve for the organization called Nitro, or the Nitro project, you can see that they get less funding allocated in a world where XO is allocating a simulated budget of, say, just over $10 million. Okay, so if you think the marginal returns curve for Nitro is shaped like that, that makes you want to trade off. Like these other organizations, Electroworks, are now looking a little better and they should get some more money, but they shouldn't get all the money just because their curve is higher. And the optimal amount of money for them to get is calculated by the app here. So if you have intuitions about, Do I want to really definitely push Nitro out until they get their full, whatever this number is here, almost $2 million? Or do I want to like kind of drop them off really quickly so that they get the first little bit of money, but not necessarily a huge amount? You can express that with these curves, and then the algorithm tells you the optimal amount of funding that each organization should have, taking into account all the organizations you're considering giving to. There's trade-offs here. And one of the trade-offs you have is the future. You might want to hold on to funding for future grant-making rounds, and you might want to express that in a curve. So we have a special curve here called hold, where we just indicate, okay, if we're giving grants and it feels like each dollar we're giving out is only worth 20 cents given to the best giving opportunities we can find, then we should probably hold on to that money and wait for the future. So you can express all those things with marginal value functions. Now, back to the slides. Now I want to talk about what happens when there's multiple funders, because we're into decentralization here. And each of those funders is capable of expressing a suite of marginal value functions indicating where they think money should go. And those functions can be sensitive to each other. So, for example, if everyone else has already overfunded an org that you really like, maybe you don't want to give more money to that org. Maybe you think they've got enough. On the other hand, if everyone thinks that an org is really popular and thinks someone else is going to fund it, they might all sort of stand by and hope someone else is going to fund, like the Anti-Malaria Foundation or something everyone recognizes is a really good way to save lives. And then no one funds it because everyone thought someone else would do it. So we don't want that. And we also don't want weird games where everyone's sort of holding out on the bystander effect, where it's like, I don't want to spend my money on the Anti-Malaria Foundation because I know everyone else is going to fund it. So I'm going to wait and then see if it gets enough funding. And then if it's good, I'm going to fund my pet projects that I think no one else recognizes. But if no one funds the Anti-Malaria Foundation, then I'll like jump in and save it at the last minute. This is a stressful relationship for funders to have with each other. It's a kind of like a game of chicken where, everyone's trying to hold out on funding the obvious things so that someone else will do it. And in the S process, we're trying to eliminate that ordering effect, that holdout feeling, the bystander effect, the pile-on effect, all at once using marginal utility function aggregation. So as I said, you could choose an order for the funders, but this introduces trust issues, and it matters who's the final player in this game. And it also sucks for the organizations because you end up with the first funder who came in and thought about you, maybe fully funded you, and you don't get any funding from the other people who are satisfied now that you have enough money, but would have funded you if no one else had. And so you have this false sense of insecurity where you think you've just got this one supporter, but actually there's a bunch of people who would have stepped in to support you. So we want to eliminate that problem as well. So at this point, I actually can't see the chat because of the screen share, and I'm wondering if there's any questions that have come up that would be good. And if not,
You're free to go on. They're asked and answered in the chat.
Great. So a better thing would be to aggregate everyone's marginal utility functions and run a simulation where each simulated funder represented by the funder's marginal utility functions chooses to hand out, say, 1% of their budget, or 0.1%. So in the first step of the simulation, simulated funder 1 gives out 0.1% of their budget to the best place that she thinks money should go right now based on her utility functions. Now, the second simulated funder sees where that money went and wonders, okay, now where should I give? Was that enough to fully fund my favorite place? If not, I'm going to give a bit more. And then the simulation moves to the next step. And this way, essentially, nobody goes first. Everyone takes turns in simulation giving out 0.1% of their budget, and there's not this anxiety about whether I should wait or go soon. No org gets fully neglected, because if by the end of the simulation there's an organization that everyone likes but no one funded yet, well, their utility functions are going to pick up on that and fund them. Okay. Now, I think we can do even better than that, and that's what we do with the S process. We not only run that simulation once, we run it many, many times while people talk to each other and adjust their curves. So you'll have situations like funder one says, whoa, it looks like you guys are giving a lot to organization one. I found them to be deceptive in the past when I dug into their annual reports and found them to be exaggerating. And then the other funders can make an update of their beliefs on that and sort of adjust their opinions. I think this is really, really important. I don't think numbers can replace discourse yet. And we should keep having lots and lots of conversations with each other while we do funding. So that's part of how we run the S process. Each funder inputs their idiosyncratic values for how much money should go to each org. And then we have a matrix that highlights disagreements. Like, okay, it looks like funder XO here really likes Nitro, but everyone else thinks Nitro is no good. And so maybe there's a conversation we should have when we have our group meetings. People can say, Nitro, tell us why you think, XO, tell us why Nitro is so good. And then they have a conversation. Maybe XO changes her mind, or maybe everyone else kind of comes to like Nitro a bit better. There's that exchange of value and information. So now let's go to what happens when you have a funder who wants to delegate through other people. The simple solution here, like just imagine you have $1 billion, you're trying to find people to help you give it away. You'd love to just hire all your smartest friends or the people that you respect the most to decide where your money goes. But maybe the reason you respect them is that they're busy doing something else. And it's so you can't just hire all the people you want to help, that you want to get help from. One thing you could do is just hand them all $1 million and say, here, each of you have $1 million, give it to one of these 30 organizations, please. I think then you risk the toe stepping problem where they can pile on too much to one org if they don't coordinate, or they can bystander effect away from an org if they don't coordinate. So you want to instill some kind of coordination. And the simplest, most efficient way to do that is for them each to draw marginal utility curves, like we do in the S process. Now, I think there's an even better thing to do, which is what we do in the S process.
Can I interrupt? We have a question. A question from the chat of, can you explain how these funders are setting and submitting their marginal value functions? Is it quantitative or qualitative, or are there defined structures?
Yeah. So in any given, usually in our grant rounds, we're focused on a particular cause area. So for us, it's often been existential risk, which is reducing the cause area is basically reducing the risk of human extinction. And so that's a quantity that people can argue about and say, I think this organization is, reducing risk by X% per dollar, or X% per $1 million. And even though it's very hard to ground out those claims because you don't get to wait for extinction events to happen and then collect data from them and then report back, it is at least something concrete that people can argue about. And so I think the S process works best when the meetings are organized around a particular kind of goal for a society that people can debate concretely about the mechanics of. Hopefully that answers the question. There's not an imposition within the app to measure your values in existential risk. It's just, that happens at the level of discourse rather than in the app itself. The app just measures the value of each dollar given relative to the value of what you think the most valuable dollar given is. You call the most valuable dollar worth $1, and then each other dollar, if it feels worth less, you measure it as being worth less in your subjective judgment. Okay. Coming back, the best solution when you have a bunch of recommenders, people that are recommending grants to a funder, is to first ask them to enter their marginal value functions in an S process instance like our app. Then watch them debate and update their positions for a while. So you get a sense, you get the vibe from each person, like this person has really thought things through versus like this person hasn't thought things through. They're just like winging it. Or this person is really smart, but they haven't put any time into it this time. So I'm not sure how much I trust them. And then once they lock in, once the meetings are over and they lock in their marginal value functions, you as a funder can then enter your own marginal value functions for the recommenders. So you can use the same process for funding orgs for deciding how much funding should go through each recommender. So here's an example of that. This is just like a fictitious numbers I made up where say Jan is deferring to these recommenders and draws a marginal utility curve indicating how good is it to pump additional money through the judgment of XO versus VA versus IF. If you think someone's initial ideas are really good, you give them a high first dollar value. And if you think their ideas are going to keep being good when you keep pumping more money through that person, you give them a large last dollar threshold. And as you change the threshold here, where you want to give your last dollar, we call that the last dollar threshold, that changes how much money passes through each recommender, which you can see here at the top left. But it also then flows through to determine how much each organization gets. So as this person GZ here, I think this is GZ, yeah, as this person GZ here is getting less and less funding, that's changing how much money flows through to the organizations. But as you can see, it's not a really drastic change. And that's because the other recommenders are looking at the same reality. They're all looking at the same facts of the matter about what's good. And so if you don't pump all your money through GZ, that doesn't have a huge impact on how much money these organizations get, which to me is a sign that we're getting at truth. We're getting at some kind of mutually agreeable, understandable facts about where the money should go, which I find exciting. Of course, we can have bubbles and filters and stuff like that that make everyone collectively wrong. We got to watch out for it. Oh,
Can I interrupt again with another question?
Yes.
We have a question here from Juan. What are your thoughts on making claims made during discourse more verifiable or explicitly conditioning the impact of the claim on some factor? He mentions that I've personally seen a lot of false or exaggerated claims in discourse-only reputation systems, both negative and positive, which lead to really unfortunate consequences in funding systems. So basically have an explicit factor built into any adjustments that happen during discourse after initial assignments were done.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So a thing we do is definitely, at each meeting, we raise open questions that should be looked into so that people then go and investigate and find out if those claims are check out. But it's interesting, you could have an actual formula built into the system that penalizes automatically participants for having exaggerated. We don't do that automatically. It is an interesting prospect. I do think that there's a natural amount of penalization that happens when the funder looks at everyone's work and recorded conversations and then decides how much they trust everybody. I would currently be reluctant to add an extra penalty on top of what I think the funder will socially naturally implement, but in a decentralized setting that might be valuable. And I'll come back to other ideas in that area further to the end of the talk. Surely that is not a fully satisfying answer to how to penalize exaggeration, but it's what we have. Okay, so that's what the funder interface looks like. I guess I already showed you that a little bit. Next is now what happens when you have multiple funders. Now you've got the same, you've got a few people interested in a similar cause area. This kind of similar group of experts are really, trusted to evaluate these questions. So everyone wants to hire them up to their foundation, but they're all too busy. But it's fine. You can just share an S-process instance and watch their debates and decide how much money you want to flow through them. And the S-process just handles the issue of bystander effects and pile-on effects and ordering effects for who gives money when. I think the most interesting thing about this is that, again, the funders don't have to play chicken with each other. There's no, I'll hold off, you go first. Okay. So here's what that looks like in the app. I will switch now to what it looks like when we have multiple funders. And this is how we've usually been doing it for the past few rounds. You can see here, we have 3 funders, Jan, Jed, and David. And these are hypothetical organizations. We didn't want to violate anyone's privacy by putting up the real orgs. But the numbers here are modulo some noise that I added for to make it difficult to recover exactly who anyone is. These numbers are real numbers that were entered, approximately speaking, by real participants in the system. And you can see here from this graphic that because of the, you can click on the Jan node here, that this is Jan's evaluation of how much he trusts the different recommenders. This is this recommender's or expression of how much money and when it should flow to each organization. And then all that gets aggregated together in a Sigma node here, which takes a second to load. Probably shouldn't click. And you can see here, okay, we have let's look at this, well, let's find one that's getting, here we have Electroworks. It looks like Electroworks getting money through 3 different recommenders, XO, and a tiny little bit from BO here, and then also a little bit from VA. And then XO is getting funding delegated from Jan, but also a little bit from Jed, and it looks like none from David. So we have this flow through, and as you can see, there's a big difference between how much each funder is giving, but the funders can still have a conversation with each other at the end and share their impressions of like who did good work evaluating where these grants should go. So that is what it looks like in app form. And again, we always have this matrix here that can be used to draw out disagreements. And unfortunately, we don't make our conversations, our recorded conversations public. We do that for basically to make it less scary for the recommenders to sign up and participate. So if they have positive or negative views of any organization, they're not scared about people getting angry at them on the internet. But I hope we move to a world where everyone can express their opinions freely and they don't have to worry about that sort of outcome when people freely express their evaluations of organizations. And I hope that the rollout of public goods funding activities like Gitcoin and the S process will make it so that more people can get involved in expressing their opinions about where money should go, so that people are less triggered by hearing those expressions. It's just normal to have positive and negative evaluations of orgs, and nobody is freaked out if you think someone shouldn't get money. Okay, this is coming up close to the end of my slides, but I have a few more things to say. I want to make a comparison to quadratic, what I call it quadratic matching, because you're kind of matching donations with other donations in the quadratic funding space. Quadratic funding elicits honesty from participants. That's what's exciting about it. The formula for marginal value of making more donations tells you that you just want to give exactly the amount that you believe the organization should get. But it leads to suboptimal allocations because of these bystander effects, these pile-on effects, the ordering effects, all that. The people are not coordinated in terms of how much money should go to any particular organization in total. The S process solves that problem by aggregating everyone's marginal utility functions into a process where everyone kind of acts simultaneously. And it in practice seems to elicit a high level of honesty. We don't have a theorem proving that it elicits honesty. And in fact, we know that there's small incentives to deviate from perfectly honest expressions. However, those incentives are very small, and in practice, they don't seem relevant. So we are pretty happy about that. And it would be an interesting research problem to actually like precisely define and measure the honesty incentives in the S process. And if you want to do research on that, you can email me. It's also a feature and not a bug that the top level funders are not forced to communicate with each other in any particular way, so that it's easy for them to decide to participate without being freaked out that someone's going to get mad at them for what they're expressing. So that's a key part of the process there. And it is something I would like us to do in the future, or at least consider doing, is adding quadratic matching agents to the S process itself. So you can have a little agent in the simulation that watches the recommenders and quadratically matches their donations. So now you get the benefits of quadratic funding and the benefits of the optimal allocation outcome that the S process gives you. So these principles of quadratic funding and the S process can be combined. And I'm pretty excited about that prospect. There's a bunch of research that I think people should know about in the area of transparency in game theory. Game theory, a lot of economics is built on game theory and then presumes opacity on the part of agents participating in the system. I think this is a false modeling assumption that causes people to trust each other less than they should, which leads to low trust systems, which leads to low trust behavior. And I think we should stop, and we should start modeling economic actors as partially translucent. I'd encourage people to read about translucent game theory or open source game theory as an important shift in how we think of agents in economics. I want to say belief aggregation is important. We should not merely aggregate the behavior of giving money. We should aggregate the beliefs behind the decision to give money. And here's a couple of papers about aggregating beliefs, or what happens when you don't, which is that people with true beliefs end up winning a lot of bets, and people with less accurate beliefs lose bets and kind of get screwed over, which sucks for them. And I think it's an unfair world. Lastly, I think mechanism design underestimates the cost of lying. Most formal mechanisms for eliciting honesty just assume that the agents in it are fully opaque. It assumes that there's no computational cost to constructing a lie. It assumes there's no reputational risk to being caught in a lie later. And it assumes that the agents have no internal, morally experienced distaste for lying, which is a whole other thing that's a lot of people experience. So I think when we're designing these mechanisms, we should be accounting for the fact that honesty is cheaper than lying in a lot of circumstances. And I think that there's room in the economy to gain greater trust between people and institutions by recognizing that not everything is adversarial, because it's not that easy to lie. So, I mean, it is easy to lie in some ways, and people lie and then they get caught and you hear about it. But you hear about it, and that's part of what makes it costly to lie. And I want our mechanism design to be sensitive to that fact, so you don't accidentally assume too little trust between the participants, and thereby lose out on optimization potential. So in summary, number one, we should not aggregate money. We should aggregate marginal value functions. Number two, funders should have a final say over the recommendations given to them so that they have an incentive to enter the process. Number three, discourse is not a substitute for numbers. Please keep having the conversation part. And lastly, repeated simulations during discourse can turn one-shot games into iterated games, which makes them more cooperative game theoretically, and it also makes them more transparent. So that's it. Please think about it, and keep funding the public goods, everybody. Thank you. Oh, lastly, I'm sorry, I got the footnote. We have a job opening. We want to hire someone to manage and develop the S-Process app full-time. It's been a side project for all of us so far, but we do want to hire someone or collaborate with someone who wants to do it at their home institution. That's fine too. And you can contact me or SFF or Oliver at these email addresses. Thanks.
Thanks, Andrew. We've got one more question for you before we let you go, if you have time. And that is, how much are the grants and the decisions described here purely prospective, so based on how funds will be used against some plan, versus iterated prospective, pseudo-retrospective, so keep funding them so that they keep having similar or greater impact to what they've had?
In practice, the recommenders in discussions always consider retrospective. We use these the S-Process is designed for funding things that sort of have, it's sort of like there's a bucket already there that maybe already had some funding and can get some more. It also works for prospective funding, but it's really good for retrospective. So in practice, we're always thinking about and the recommenders are always thinking about, wow, these people have done a good job. Maybe they'll do a good job in the future, or these people have done a good job. They should like get some slack at their org to like take a breath as a reward. Okay.
Thanks again to Critch for taking us on a bobsled ride through the curves of the S function. And I think my new rap battle name is going to be Most Valuable Dollar. I'll think on that over our third coffee break. So I'll see you again in about 15 minutes, or at, I believe it's 2140 Coordinated Universal Time. See you again when we reconvene.